100 years ago, in the far away and almost impossible to comprehend year that is 2017, relatively obscure indie game studio Hopo Games released a devblog for their upcoming game Risk of Rain 2. You might have heard it mentioned here and there. The devblog, a somewhat rare one written by Paul, discussed one of their new shiny systems that would let them visually show the items you collect across your rampage through the planet as little trinkets stuck to your survivor. A feature that they couldn't really make work in the first game given that most survivors were on average 6.5 pixels tall. Now, however, with the power of 3D, they could make the dream of watching the survivors mutilate themselves come true. What joy! This whole system was especially neat to me because of the cover art used for Risk of Rain, a cover which, fun fact, took Duncan Hopo Drummond 4 hours to draw actually. Time well spent I say, even if he might not have thought so at the time. Random art I made for fun, eh? Over a decade ago, when I was first falling in love with Risk of Rain, I always enjoyed looking at the cover art just to see how many items I could recognize. You of course have the obvious one, with the ukulele, the alien head, and the disposable missile launcher that I remember some people thought was a portable computer actually. That's the beauty of pixel art, friend. It often leads to great whimsical misinterpretation. Other present items include the toxic worm, Paul's goat hoof, a concussion grenade by his bandolier that I always thought had a lit fuse because of the yellow next to it, but I think that is actually supposed to be splatters of some sort of goo. Lovely. Wait, is that a broken sprouting egg? It looks like yolk surrounded by eggshell. Oh, that's horrible. Oh, goodness me. Ugh. Guess it no longer has to decide whether it's in a state of living or dying. The poor thing. Around the neck you have a monster tooth necklace. There's a growth of some kind on his left upper arm. Could be the mysterious vial or the bustling fungus, though the latter item wasn't added to the game until a month after this art was drawn, so I'm thinking the former. There's also these red particles around the helmet, and following down the right arm you get to some very crudely drawn soldier syringes. Their perspective and sizing is so wonky that I'd forgive you for not even realizing these are syringes in the first place. I know it took me a bit of a spell. There's also this weird cluster of pixels on his right thigh, and I'm not sure if that's even supposed to be an item or not. Never have been. Doesn't look comfortable whatever it is. Now I bring this up because whenever people talked about the item display system in 2, and a lot of people did since it is a rather cool feature, many would talk about it along the lines of it being something the first game didn't do, which I always thought was a little inaccurate. Now they're right that when you picked up something like the Lensmaker's glasses, it didn't actually show up on the commando's helmet. I mean, how could it? But that didn't mean the items weren't visualized in a different way. Hell, even Paul said in the devblog that one of the most satisfying things with Risk of Rain was watching your small character transform into a big spinning ball of death as you made your way to the contact light. There's some truth in that, as the contrast between how the survivor looks when they land on the planet contra the mess of colors and particle effects they become towards the end is a very striking part of the game, and has always worked very well with the game's theme of losing our humanity. In essence, the way items are visually represented can be divided into 2 categories. Well, 3 I guess, with the first being not at all, and includes Piggy Bank, Tough Times, the Old Looper, Colossal Knurl, as well as the 56-leaf Clover and Rapid Mitosis. Welcome back lads, it's good to see you again. Smart Shopper technically has no specific visuals to it, but given it makes enemies explode into substantially more gold, there's still a visual impact from it, it's in a bit of a grey zone. The other category are the visual aids, or the informative ones. For example, when you pick up the gold gun, you get this little bar next to your character, and while it is a visual representation, it's more there to inform the player as to how much of the gold to damage buff they currently have. Something like the slowed, the buff from the prison shackles that shows up above the inhabitants is also relevant here. It's not completely without stylization, but its purpose is more informational than purely visual. Something like the electrical circle of the charge fill generator is a flavorful way of visually representing the item, but the main reason for its existence is to show you how far the damage radius is so that you can position yourself appropriately to make use out of it. The icicles of the Frost Relic are there to visualize the hitboxes, as are the bombs from the sticky bombs or the spike strips. There's even more subtle ones like the little slash that shows up when the crowbar activates. A lot of these look really neat, and do a good job carrying over both the thematic elements of the item as well as make them more tangible. I won't be talking about these ones today, however, even though I really want to sing the Frost Relic its praises like a bard outside their muse's window. The reason is that these are inherently tied to the gameplay, and if we go back to Risk of Rain 2's item display system from the beginning of this ramble, that system is more than anything an aesthetic and thematic element. There's not really any true mechanical gameplay purpose to the items stuck to you, at least there wasn't back when I played all the way up to the anniversary update. Any information relating to the items was mostly reserved to being displayed above your or the enemy's health bar, which naturally makes sense. It's a very clear way to convey everything at a moment's glance. Risk of Rain 2 has some items that are visual in both the aesthetic and mechanical sense, like the Frost Relic that shows its damage radius with a blizzard-like effect, but the charming little snowflake that hovers around you is there purely for visual reasons, which is a neat little detail. My focus here today is to talk about the third category of the visual representations of items in the first Risk of Rain, the one that are purely visual and have no bearing on the mechanical side of the gameplay whatsoever. This is because I find them to be a curious case of resourcefulness in how to work with the rather small character sprites. Maybe you didn't get to see your survivor stabbing yourself with distressingly large syringes, but given how they were drawn, maybe that's for the best. Speaking of the syringes, let's start with that item as I believe it has one of the most striking of manners in representing itself visually. Picking up this item envelops the survivor in this jittery yellow effect, like some sort of bizarre flame has consumed them. Something that's necessary to bring up is that these effects are naturally abstractions. It's not as if the commando injects himself with a soldier's syringe and suddenly his entire body literally bursts with visible energy as this glow manifests itself. The core idea of the item is that it's a physical enhancer, right? A truly awful cocktail of all sorts of things meant to drive your body into an adrenaline-filled frenzy so you can fight better. I think the aura effect represents that idea so fantastically well. You can almost imagine a survivor injecting themselves and then start to twitch and shake as the contents flood their veins, their breathing becoming rapid and belabored as their body is forced to push through. Strictly speaking, it's a very simple effect, but that doesn't prevent its effectiveness. The fact it's so violent and fast, almost distorting the sprite at times, is really what gives it its potency. While I think it's neat to actually see the syringes physically manifest on the survivor in Risk of Rain 2, their size and the fact there's like 3 of them clustered together always made it appear almost a bit comical to me. There's something so excessive about it, and indeed the effect in the first game is a bit exaggerated in its own way, but it being so abstract feeds my imagination, which I appreciate. More than anything, I think it's better connected to the whole dehumanization element that was so key to the original Risk of Rain. Well, at least I think so, me and all those loose screws of mine. There goes another. A very neat detail is that while the aura from the soldier's syringe is quite turbulent, the one you get from the energy cell item is not only a cooler, more opaque color, but likewise more calm. Makes sense, as while the soldier's syringe is a horrible blend of everything from heroin to gasoline, the energy cell is a more clean form for energy, and doesn't really mangle your internal systems the same way. Though the effect gets way more intense the lower HP you are, eventually even matching the syringe, though it still feels less violent, for lack of a better word. It's a cute little way to differentiate the effects of 2 items that both give attack speed, even if the energy cell might hold the title of the most forgettable item in Risk of Rain. Now, the erratic visual effect from the soldier's syringe might not necessarily make sense for Handy or Chef, given where we have blood, they have electricity. But then again, there's gasoline in those syringes. Hey, maybe that's what's giving them a kick. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded if the game made an exception and didn't give them the visual effect. Moving from one of the best items in the game to another item in that same esteemed echelon, we have the Lensmaker's glasses. Its effect is much simpler than the syringes, though definitely more abstract with that simplicity. Once picked up, the glasses will give you this red, I wanna say star, above the survivor. It's a static element, it doesn't light up or pulse or anything of the like whenever you land a crit. The whole idea of the Lensmaker's glasses is that they're precision optics, enhancing your sight and letting you see weak points or hit your targets better. Critical hits have always been kind of hand-waved as being able to seek out weak spots or being able to hit them where it hurts, as it were. Especially whenever you have to explain why a rogue in a fantasy game can suddenly do more damage than a meteor landing on your head. Maybe it's supposed to be like a crosshair of some kind? I will admit, this one never really did much for me. It is, however, interesting for other reasons, which you'll soon see. Another item playing off critical hits is the Harvester's Scythe, and it gives this green empty shape above your survivor. Green, especially a more vibrant hue, is a stereotypical color for health and good things, and that droopy effect it has likewise carries with it a sense of being organic and tied to something alive. It's a competent enough little visual, but both this and the Lensmaker's glasses aren't really too interesting on their own, but when you combine them, they fit together seamlessly. The Harvester's Sight effect becomes an outline for the red star of the Lensmaker's glasses. It makes sense if you think about it. The Lensmaker's glasses are the quintessential crit item, and with that, the star in a way becomes the representation of critical hit as a concept. Given the scythe augments crits by making a heal of them, it's a cool way to represent the whole crit to heal idea by making the red star have this green droopy outline. It's a great little interaction between two items' visual elements in a game that doesn't really have any. Most of the effects just kind of exist together and overlap without much consideration for one another. Though this made me wonder if this was a remnant of some older scrapped system. Did the original two developers at Hopo Games once intend to have multiple different effects based on crit? Like for example slow on crit, explode on crit, steal kidneys on crit, etc, etc. With the idea being that the outline around the star would change depending on what items you had. Maybe it was scrapped because having multiple crit items would lead to multiple outlines and then it would just end up looking messy. After all, predatory instincts, which gives attack speed on crit, doesn't interact with the star and is instead represented by free claw tiers that change color depending on how many stacks you have of the buff. Another cool visual aid, if I might say. Please understand that this is pure speculation, and I don't have any evidence for this, but there's something about how specific this interaction is that it makes me think it was part of some greater system. It's possible, and very likely, that there's nothing more to this other than just a cute little detail they wanted to include. Moving on to some smaller effects, you have the speed lines from Paul's Goatooth and Red Whip, which I believe might be one of the oldest visual ways to convey swiftness of movement. For good reason, it works after all. Neat that the Red Whip, giving more movement speed, has a more dramatic effect. Then you have the rusty jetpack making a small flame burst out whenever you jump. I remember how back in the day some people mentioned how they thought this item should make you deal damage whenever you jumped, and I have vague memories of there being some mod out there which implemented that idea. Damage or not, I think it's a nice little burst-like effect to really sell the idea of the jetpack giving an almost explosive jump that propels you higher upwards. Given it's a rusty jetpack too, it's supposed to be a bit rickety and unstable, which I think is conveyed well here. The ATG missile launchers both make a crosshair appear around the survivor, with Mark 1 being diagonal while Mark 2s are straight. They look pretty neat together, the way the lines interchange. Both of them have the subtle, gentle pulsing effect to them that I never noticed until now. Gives a sense of being primed and ready, I reckon. It's a serviceable effect, conveying the military aspect of the item pretty well, and naturally you don't want something too gratuitous or distracting either. Details are only so until they become the most apparent part of something. Now naturally all these effects are real, they're just for flavor and fun, with them often just blending into the background and... Sorry everyone, I can't go any further. I just really need to talk about how much I love the Frost Relic item effect. Have you looked at it? I mean, really looked at it? It's magnificent! There's something about those spinning icicles that I found absolutely captivating for over a decade now. To this day, I don't think I've ever seen any visual effect in any game, pixel art or not, that has endeared me as much. There's something about the fluidity of their movement compared to the relatively simple and rigid animation that dominates Risk of Rain, and those after images really sell the whole coolness of the item. It actually reminds me a lot of the smoke that comes off dry ice, if you ever seen that. Hold on, let me find you a clip. What the fuck are people doing out there? Give me a second. There you go. How's that for a trick? You can see the similarity, right? It feels lethal and absolutely frigid, but there's this beauty to it as well. You can stack the effect 3 times, and the spinning icicles don't necessarily overlap in a synchronous fashion either, so you can get a lot of different effects from it. Add that with how multiple copies of the item makes more icicles appear per kill, and you can get even more neat effects. My favorite is probably when they all almost sync up and they're following each other closely behind. Though I must also admit there's something beautiful when they all synchronize. I think I might have brain damage, right? Because I'll behold the most gorgeous, intricate pixel art, the kind with such fidelity that makes one even wonder how it's possible to even create something so impressive. Like, you can show me a still from fucking Blasphemous, To the Moon, Har 4 Felicia, Children of Morta, anything, and yet somehow my blasted brain still goes, wow, that's pretty neat, but have you seen the icicle effect in Risk of Rain? Fucking absurd. It is a pretty neat effect though, right? At last, all good things must come to an end. Not sure how this is applicable for this video, but I digress. Within the group of items bearing visual elements of which are purely decorative, there are a group of items that all work around the same idea, and thusly I've decided to group them together here for the end. I just refer to them as particle effect visuals, which you'll probably quickly see why, though I'm sure on a technical basis it's a misnomer. Regardless, these are actually my favorite kind. First up we have the mysterious vial, another oft-forgotten item. I think more people remember its item log than what it actually does. It gives a tiny bit of health regeneration, for the record. The visual effect entails these little bubbles that start emanating out from the survivor. It's a cute little effect that is far too charming for an item this vile, but the bubbles do tie in nicely with the whole chemical aspect of the mysterious vial. More than anything, it reminds me of how in cartoons or older pixel art games they would often represent drunkenness by having bubbles floating above those inebriated. It's a very subtle effect, probably one of the most subtle effects, which I find fitting for an item seen as being very underwhelming. I bet a lot of people have never even noticed it. Secondly, among the white tier items we have the bitter root, an item with a tiny bit of curious history to it, but that's a story for another time. The effect it produces on a visual level involves making a bunch of these really cool looking leaves appear all around you. I absolutely love how this effect looks. There's something so vibrant and fresh about it. Makes me think of the sound of leaves boldly rustling in the wind whenever I see it. The bitter root holds an interesting place in Risk of Rain from a thematic standpoint, as it's one of the few items the survivor applies to themselves which isn't completely horrible. It's just a capriciously big ginseng root. You can make some great tea with it. Maybe the effect is a bit bombastic for such a minor buff, but visually speaking it's pretty stellar and has a lovely air to it. Almost makes you wish they saved it for some nature-themed red tier item, but it's nice that the bitter root has something to give it more identity. Next up, now stepping into the green tier, is the concussion grenade. And yes, it's called concussion grenade, not stun grenade, that's what they named it in 2. Concussion grenades, despite their name, aren't actually meant to just concuss in the sense of disabling foes, they're meant to be lethal. Probably why they changed the name so as to more accurately reflect the item's nature, given it's supposed to be a non-lethal stunning tool. I assure you, real-life concussion grenades are very much intended for killing, not for stunning, unlike what the item log so brazenly suggests. As for the visual effect, you get these little circles of light that flash about the survivor. It's a very stereotypical way to show disorientation, often coming from how one has difficulty discerning light when your brain has just been at the end of a proper 1-2 or whatnot. That or a little bird is flying around you, whichever. Visually speaking, it is a neat effect, and as the concussion grenade increases your chance to stun enemies, I'd likewise call it an appropriate one. But I also think it has the consequence of almost making it seem like it's a survivor who's the disoriented one. Hey, combine it with the mysterious while effect, and you can really sell the idea of the survivor being deep into some drunken bender. I'd probably get drunk too if I was in their situation. Shame there didn't seem to be any alcohol on the contact light. These last 3 entries haven't exactly belonged to the category of well-remembered items, but if you truly want to talk about iconic items, there probably isn't a single one more memorable than the ukulele. An item whose mysterious and evocative item description is arguably what most people remember the game for, that and maybe Commando's ending text. The ukulele makes these neat sparks rapidly come out of the survivor at somewhat irregular intervals. It sells the whole electrical theme of the item, but likewise also adds another level of instability to the survivor. Moreover, every other particle type visual effect tends to be slower and gentler, so this one acts as a nice contrast. It's more tangible than the others, which are mostly abstract representations, and I can very much imagine actual sparks coming off the electrically charged ukulele. The leeching seeds effect seems simple. It makes these drowsy red blotches appear around you that can remind one of blood, which is appropriate for these parasitic, flesh-burrowing bastards. Just thinking about the survivor trying to get used out of these things makes my skin crawl. Ugh. What makes the visual effect unique, however, is that it's lingering. While the other particle effects tend to appear and disappear rather quickly, the one from the leeching seed remain for a while and then slowly go away, making it so you get this really nifty looking red trail behind you. It's the most organic feeling effect, and there is something a bit ominous about it too, the way it almost makes it seem like you are leaving a trail of floating blood behind you. I've always been a big fan of it. This effect might also be what those bubbles on the cover art are supposed to represent. On a side note, while I'm not going to say that the original sprite for the item itself was high pixel art or anything, but out of every item from the original Risk of Rain that made it to the sequel, I don't think any other item got as boring and imaginative a redesign as the leeching seed. They just look like big cocoa beans to me. The way they just kind of awkwardly stick to the survivor as well in that game, I don't know. I suppose when you dedicate yourself to having every item physically and concretely represented on the survivor, you end up with some cases that are difficult to implement properly. Moving on to the red tier items, we find 2 who have this particle-like visual effect. The first is permafrost, which is an item you might never specifically hope to get in a chest, but one that will always pull its weight. Permafrost is unique in that unlike most of the other particle effects here, it doesn't just stick to a single type of particle. Instead, you get a smattering of pixels in various shapes and sizes. There's squares, bubbles, smaller squares, and even 4 pointed stars. It's a very chaotic effect for an item that's thematically speaking all about freezing people in place. Maybe it's supposed to represent the permafrost melting, which I know sounds paradoxical linguistically speaking, but I really don't know what else they were going for. It's not specifically frost themed, except when those stars appear, looking almost like snowflakes I guess. There's something very discordant and unidentifiable about this effect. It feels nondescript in a way. doesn't sell me on the idea of weaponizing a chunk of permafrost really. This specific effect is one that I don't think quite works, and it leaves me a bit miffed if I'm allowed to be honest, especially given how wonderfully the other frost-related item has been visually represented. Ooh, what a crying shame, the particle effects aren't up to par. Enfin, we have the alien head. This one was always real neat to me, and it was the first one I ever noticed. You get these black flakes appear all around you, and they've always just really effectively conveyed the idea of carrying around a rotten alien head with mysterious powers to it. Honestly, the effect reminds me of rotting flies buzzing all around you, which I suppose is fitting given the item probably reeks quite a bit. Good thing the survivors are all carrying helmets, eh? Or don't have a sense of smell. Oh right, accurate. Another little thing is that these particles in particular follow the survivor around in a more unique way, having a small delay. One that makes it almost feel as if the particles are alive and following the commando but can't quite keep up perfectly. Now, I know what you're all thinking. What if we stack all the particle items together? You got it. Wow, what a mess of colors and particles. Absolutely atrocious. The item effects get lost in a mess until they become practically unrecognizable from what they once were. How perfectly fitting. With this, you might be sitting there with a perplexed scowl and scratching your head, wondering why one would even care about such minute little things. It's true that these little item visual effects might seem very inconsequential, and I'm not going to argue that they're the hidden glue that holds Risk of Rain together. We all know that's handy, but items and item identity is an important part of games like Risk of Rain, I feel. In some cases, the items become characters of their own, either through recurring jokes or because they have something very unique or memorable to them. Just look at Casey from Enter the Gungeon. In a game where everything is a gun or a gun pun, the case-shaped baseball bat reigns supreme as probably the most talked about weapon in that game. While many times the reason for an item's notoriety is due to mechanical design, that doesn't make the item's aesthetic elements any less important. Not only can they give the item more identity and personality, but they can help reinforce the connection between items and the game world. Make the items more than just sprites and models tied to specific beneficial effects, but instead actual tangible things that the characters make use out of. I think these little visual effects, subtle and trivial as they might be, helps bring me closer to these games, to these fantastical worlds. Modern roguelites have never been known to be narrative games, with most of the narrative elements often reserved for lore that's shying away in the background somewhere, and I think recent years have only reinforced that trend. Though there are some like Moonring and the Hades games who have tried to invoke more narrative elements into traditional roguelikes and modern roguelites respectively. But even so, a lot of the stories in rogue-type games comes from the personal journeys we go through on each run, each one being like their own little episode of some pulpy comic or adventure cartoon. It's not just the commando picking up the leeching seed item, it's a desperate survivor on a mysterious alien planet using a horrible parasite to his advantage, all in the hopes that it won't kill him before the planet's inhabitants do. Those little red blotches help make that item appear more present, more ominous, and it's just one more detail which makes the whole experience more absorbing to me. In French there is a saying, "Le petit ruisseau font le grand rivière," which essentially translates to "many small streams make for a big river." Norway has a similar saying, "Mange bekker små blir en stor å," meaning many small streams will make a great one. It's a common saying among many cultures, and for good reason. Small touches like this have always been a sign of great care to me. They're details of whose absence I don't think would have been noticed, but to me their presence means something greater. I think sometimes artists might bring a lot of attention to the details in their work because they're afraid of them being missed. But when it's done subtly like this, I get the sense it was done because of a genuine personal desire to add them, because the developers themselves thought it would be neat, and that's what mattered the most. It's that little human touch, that little bit of fun and joy of creation that we rarely talk about, that notion of creative desire. Forging creative work is often a strenuous process. I've heard a writer once say that writing is like chipping ice off a freezer with a fork, though I can't find who originally said that. Yet, as harsh a process as it might sometimes be, there's often a desire to create in there as well, especially for more whimsical or pulpy stuff like Risk of Rain. The volatile gameplay and the bipolar score might be the two big shining stars of the game, but the alien atmosphere, those crisp sound effects, even the way the clouds shift around sky meadows, the way the planet's moon looms in the horizon, the god rays on that cave in the desolate forest, the dust that whirls around the Temple of the Elders, those character select animations, and yes, even these little item effects. The little streams make the big rivers. Now, lest we grow sentimental here, I think I've said my piece for now, but I'll see you around very soon. Take care now.
particle breeze, particle